We definitely don't know what happened in that house right now. What came out? Detective Farrell confirms that there was no surveillance video of Celeste or David at the residence that night. There was no presentation of witnesses seeing Celeste enter that home on Doheny Place. And while the prosecution asserts that David arranged for an Uber to pick Celeste up that night to take her to his place, and reportedly there was a text conversation about that, including texts about the address, the Uber's arrival, the gate door being unlocked, apparently, the Uber driver could not definitively say that he dropped Celeste off at this house. Detective Farrell testified that nobody saw Celeste get out of the Uber that night. No one testified, as of yet, that they saw.
According to testimony given under oath at a Los Angeles preliminary hearing, a homicide detective told the court there was no surveillance footage, no eyewitness, and no confirmed sighting of a 14-year-old girl walking into the house, where prosecutors say she was murdered. Sit with that for a second. A first-degree murder charge, filed by one of the largest district attorney's offices in the country, built in part on a 20-minute window that, according to the sworn testimony so far, nobody actually watched happen. This is the crime infinity, and this is the case of singer David Anthony Burke, known publicly as D4vd, charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation of human remains, in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. We're not here to tell you he's guilty. We're not here to tell you he's innocent. We're here to walk through what the court record actually shows, and where the prosecution's case, by its own evidence presented so far, still has documented gaps. Before we go deeper into what the records actually show, make sure you're subscribed to the Crime Infinity, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Let's start with what the prosecution does have, because a fair account has to start there, and it's substantial. Detectives testified to a phone allegedly containing sexually explicit images and months of text exchanges referencing an ongoing relationship, a pregnancy scare, and emergency contraception, with prosecutors placing the earliest sexually charged messages as far back as November 2023 and continuing into March 2025.
Is innocent unless proven guilty. And even before I go into all the potential holes, the prosecution has already presented some arguably compelling evidence at this preliminary hearing. I mean, when it comes to the continuous sexual abuse charge, in my legal opinion, the prosecution has a lot. If they're trying to prove that David had an illegal sexual relationship with a minor over a period of time, when LAPD detective Corey Farrell was on the stand, he went through all of these alleged sexually explicit photos reportedly on David's phone. I'm not even going to get too specific on this, but basically, it was alleged these were images of the singer engaging in sex acts with Celeste. Naked photos, text messages about Plan B, pregnancy, and abortion, sexual positions, the relationship, emergency contraception. And Farrell says the dates of these conversations with sexual references began all the way back in November of 2023 and continued until March of 2025. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, David's phone at one point purportedly texted, because, I can't say definitively that David was saying this, right? It's David's phone. Maybe the defense would suggest that somebody else was using it. Maybe tough to argue. David's phone apparently sends a message to Celeste's phone, and it's basically a message asking if it's his. So you would basically make the argument that you're talking about a baby. Celeste's phone responds, "Of course it's yours, David." And to be clear about what a defense could be, and this came out during the preliminary hearing, where Deputy DA Beth Silverman, the prosecutor in this case, made the point that even if Celeste had lied to David about her age, it doesn't matter. It doesn't absolve him of criminal liability, that is still sexual abuse of a child. Now, I will tell you, I haven't seen any case.
A DNA analyst testified that blood evidence recovered from a garage was consistent with Celeste's profile. A criminalist described linear cut marks and staining on floor mats that tested positive for possible blood. Investigators say an inflatable pool, chainsaws, cadaver bags, and cleaning supplies were delivered to the residence in the days following Celeste's disappearance, some allegedly ordered under an alias. Prosecutors say blue plastic fragments recovered with her remains were consistent with that pool.
that, but I'm sure the defense will explore that. We'll see. Now, in terms of the alleged dismemberment charge, unlawful mutilation of human remains, detectives testified about these chainsaws, a mop system, cadaver bags, a blue inflatable pool that were all allegedly ordered to David's home using an alias in the days after Celeste's reported death. How a DNA expert testified that evidence from apparent blood stains in the home's garage were consistent with a DNA match for Celeste, that you had a criminalist testify about mats at David's place that had linear cuts and stains that tested positive for possible blood, evidence of an alleged trash bag with stained wipes, alleged cuts to this blue inflatable pool, how blue plastic fragments found in Celeste's remains are allegedly consistent with the inflatable pool that David reportedly ordered and that was found at David's place. That David's Tesla, where Celeste's remains were found, reportedly had 11 air fresheners in it. How testing found possible traces of blood in the car. Silverman suggests that blood could have leaked from the parked Tesla, soaked through the rubber mats, and reached the bricks underneath. And what about the testimony that allegedly right after this supposed killing, during the night of the 23rd into the morning of the 24th, digital data allegedly shows the Tesla traveling to Santa Barbara, that Celeste's passport card was allegedly found in Santa Barbara County. Now, I say all of that to say that the prosecution definitely has evidence in this case that will challenge the defense, but that doesn't take away from the central point of this episode. I want to look at the potential issues, the potential gap.
They say cell phone and vehicle data placed the Tesla in which her remains were later discovered traveling to Santa Barbara overnight, in the hours after prosecutors alleged she was killed, and that her ID card was later recovered in that same county. Investigators also testified that the vehicle contained an unusually high number of air fresheners, and that testing detected possible traces of blood beneath the rubber floor mats. That is a real body of evidence, and a judge reviewed it and ruled there was enough for the case to proceed to trial. But enough to proceed, and enough to convict beyond a reasonable doubt, are two different legal thresholds under California law, and the preliminary hearing transcript shows the defense already working the seams between them. Prosecutors have also said publicly that what was shown at this hearing represents only a portion of the evidence they've collected, which matters, because it means some of what follows could still be closed before trial.
I want to do something here. I want to do something very, very specific when it comes to David Anthony Burke, the singer facing first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation of human remains charges in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. By the way, I just got to say this real quick. You know, we've been covering this case, but if you're interested in looking at the documents and getting a full 360-degree perspective on this, everything we have, go to the Long Crime Plus app, because we have a case file section for all of the big cases that we follow. We got one for David, so check it out. A lot of information there that we touch upon a lot here on Sidebar, but if you want to read everything and see it for yourself, it's up there. I want to look at the potential holes in the prosecution's case, the potential gaps. And the reason we're doing this is because we just went through the preliminary hearing. And this gave us a glimpse at some things. And even though, yes, the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence, there was enough evidence for this case to move forward, we know that the prosecution doesn't have to present everything they have at a preliminary hearing. And by the way, DA Nathan Hochman said what was presented by our office over the course of the last week is a small but illustrative fraction of the evidence investigators have accumulated that proves defendant Burke is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the brutal murder of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And B, the bar is so low at a preliminary hearing, right? You just have to show sufficient cause to...
With that caveat clearly on the table, here is where the record, as it currently stands, has holes. Gap 1. No one has testified to witnessing the death or the window around it. The rideshare driver prosecutors say dropped Celeste at the residence could not confirm, under questioning, that he actually saw her exit the vehicle. No neighbor, no camera, and no third party has placed her inside that house. The state's entire timeline for that night is reconstructed from text messages and phone location data, which is legally sufficient on its own. Circumstantial cases are won in this country routinely, but it means the specific event prosecutors describe as a killing currently has no direct witness on the record.
Of time, that window at night when prosecutors believe Celeste was murdered after allegedly arriving at David's place. Now, what could the prosecution do? They could couple the text message exchange between Celeste and David with location data on the phone, potentially map it to the purchase of items from David afterwards, or allegedly from David afterwards, and use the allegation that there is no more activity from Celeste's phone to put out a timeline of when she allegedly arrived and when she was allegedly killed. That's how they even get to that 20-minute window. And yes, cases can be brought and won on circumstantial evidence alone. You and I both know that. You don't always need direct evidence like surveillance footage or an eyewitness, but we're talking potential gaps here. And that brings us to another important point. Assuming she goes into the house, what happened? How do you know it was first-degree murder with special circumstances? Neither Detective Farrell nor the deputy medical examiner could precisely say what happened. And that is complicated by the fact.
Gap 2. There is no recovered murder weapon. The deputy medical examiner testified he could not determine precisely what caused two penetrating wounds he identified as the cause of death, could not say with certainty whether the two wounds occurred within seconds of one another, and, under cross-examination, acknowledged he could not rule out that Celeste herself was holding whatever instrument caused them. That is not evidence of self-harm.
That I mentioned. This is when the defense was questioning him, because the defense asked if advanced decomposition, which we have in this case, can affect the accuracy of drug results in toxicology testing. The witness says potentially. The defense asked if it's helpful to know whether a person has a mental health history, whether they're suicidal, whether they're a habitual drug user while preparing an autopsy report. The witness says potentially. Dr. Ho didn't apparently speak with relatives about these characteristics or potential characteristics. And the defense, as far as we could see, seemed to insinuate on cross-examination, is it possible that Celeste may have stabbed herself, that she may have done something to herself? You know, defense attorney Marilyn Benarski had Dr. Ho establish that he cannot rule out that the two penetrating wounds, which he claimed were the cause of death, occurred within seconds of each other. Quote, you cannot determine whether Ms. Hernandez was holding the knife that caused the two wounds, correct? Correct. You can't rule that out, right? So that is a consideration, but we would expect to find hesitation marks. And then he was asked, is it fair to say that you don't know the circumstances under which these wounds occurred? And he replied, correct. Assuming, of course, it's a knife, right? We don't have the murder weapon. That leaves room for reasonable doubt. That leaves room for the defense to explore. And we have to imagine the defense could bring in their own pathologist to testify to maybe a different.
It is an acknowledged, sworn gap in the physical evidence. And it's exactly the kind of gap a defense expert witness at trial is built to widen. Gap 3. The time of death has not been pinned to a specific date. The medical examiner testified that, given the advanced state of decomposition, he was comfortable saying Celeste had been dead for a period measured in weeks. But he stopped short of confirming she hadn't been dead closer to 2 months rather than a matter of days from April 23rd, the date prosecutors allege as the killing. If the defense can meaningfully push that window, it complicates the alibi text theory the entire prosecution timeline is currently built around. The theory that ties a specific string of texts to a specific 20-minute gap on a specific night.
The defense during questioning of the deputy medical examiner, because when you think about the state of decomposition and dismemberment, that's an issue. Dr. Ho testified that he's willing to say she had been dead for weeks because there are weeks and months, but he couldn't say that she had been dead for months because there are no months and weeks. I know it's a little technical, but in other words, you have a witness who can't say certainly how long Celeste had been dead before her remains were discovered. So he cannot pinpoint the exact date of her death as April 23rd, 2025, based on the autopsy. And if the defense can convince the jury that she was alive past April 23rd, that's going to be significant. Now, where do I think the prosecution is going to go with this? What do I think the prosecution is going to do to respond to all this?
Gap 4, and arguably the most concrete one, the missing chainsaw. Prosecutors introduced purchase and delivery records for 3 chainsaws sent to the residence in the days after Celeste's disappearance. 2 were recovered from the garage, and both tested negative for blood or DNA. A criminalist testified that if those particular blades had actually been used to dismember a body, cleaning them to the point of producing a negative test result would have been extraordinarily difficult to achieve. The 3rd chainsaw, A specific model reportedly ordered from a hardware retailer has never been located. If the tool prosecutors allege was used to mutilate Celeste's remains is still unaccounted for months later, that's not a minor omission. That's an open evidentiary hole that a defense attorney will stand in front of a jury and point to directly, and the prosecution knows it, which is likely part of why investigators have continued searching for it in Santa Barbara County.
Maybe told them, maybe? And just continuing our conversation about potential gaps. I mean, aside from the lack of an alleged murder weapon, what exactly did David allegedly use to dismember Celeste? Because prosecutors allege that David ordered 3 chainsaws to this home, but the 2 that were found in the garage in this residence didn't test positive for blood or DNA. Same for an electric saw that was found. There was testimony suggesting that a criminalist posited that if the blades had been used for human dismemberment, they wouldn't have been able to be cleaned to a point where their testing would have resulted in a negative result. And what I'll note about that is the deputy ME, Dr. Ho, testified that certain dismemberment is potentially consistent with chainsaw cuts. So what's the disconnect here? Well, one of the things prosecutors talked about was this 3rd missing chainsaw. And they presented product photos of this Makita brand 10-inch chainsaw, apparently from Home Depot, apparently delivered by Postmates, but detectives confirmed that the chainsaw wasn't at the place. As far as we can tell, they don't have it. I mean, is this the one? Is this the one that he allegedly used to dismember Celeste? Because if you don't have the tool, that's a gap. Now, I asked private investigator Steve Fisher about this after the preliminary hearing. He was actually in that preliminary hearing for a bit of it. He had been following the case from the very beginning. Here's what he said about the chainsaw.
Well, the medical examiner said, because of the state of decomp, they can't say for certain exactly like how long of a blade or sharp instrument that was or whatnot. And listen, I think everybody assumes it was probably a knife, but there was a lot of time that passed in between. And so it's mind-boggling to me that there was any evidence such as pool or anything still in that garage. I mean, the stupidity, right? If you're trying to cover this up. And part of me wonders, if he just knew he was going to get caught and was just kind of waiting. Because this was
Do you think the missing chainsaw is the key?
Yeah, I think that chainsaw might be in Santa Barbara.
Really?
I think on the 2nd or 3rd trip, I think he could have been, getting, because if you look at that 2nd trip, they're contending that it happened around May 5th, around Cinco de Mayo. And May 8th, I think he took another trip up there. And that makes me wonder if it was to dispose of things near that lake or something. But I don't know that for sure. I just think that could be a reason that the ID was ultimately found up there as well. It's like a disposal spot. But why he picked out, how he knew about that place is really mind-boggling. Because I've been there. It's remote. It's just a road that really goes through that area. The roads that go off of it, there's some to go to a Boy Scout camp and stuff like that. But they're not well-traveled roads. So I don't know how he even knew about this place in the middle of the night.
And I asked DA Nathan Hochman about the missing chainsaw too. And since this is an ongoing case, he really wouldn't give me much about it. But my personal opinion is, if they had the chainsaw, wouldn't they have presented it during the preliminary hearing, right? If they did, and they could show it was used in the dismemberment, they would have presented it. Particularly if they find a chainsaw in Santa Barbara where David is accused of going to, and maybe they could find something between now and trial. Maybe they could find this alleged murder weapon. Maybe they could find the chainsaw. I don't know. But when you talk about gaps,
Gap 5. None of David's associates have testified in open court yet. Prosecutors' own filings allege David gave conflicting explanations to friends about a smell coming from inside his home, and that at least one associate was reportedly compelled back to Los Angeles after failing to appear as a witness. None of those individuals have taken the stand and been cross-examined as of this hearing. Until they do, those allegations remain filed claims, not tested sworn testimony, a meaningful legal distinction.
We didn't hear any witnesses, eyewitnesses definitively saying it was David driving the car to Santa Barbara. Could someone else have used his phone? Could someone else have been using his car? I think another gap is just the lack of witnesses to what they saw and heard. I go back to the prosecution's filing. Prosecutors alleged that David lied to friends and associates about the alleged smell of decomposition at his home, at his residence. But I don't recall anyone testifying to that. We didn't see Asia Collins. We didn't see Neil Langston testify, purported friends, associates of David. I mean, you go back on July 4th, 2025, according to TMZ, there was a live stream that apparently showed David telling his friends, Neil Langston and Usgana, about this smell in his house, saying he apologized for how his bathroom smells, claimed that he went to the bathroom 2 hours earlier. Is that going to be presented by the prosecution to say he's lying about what the smell was? So a gap for me is, what would they testify to? If you recall, Neo was reportedly arrested for failure to appear as a witness and was seemingly brought back to LA to testify before a grand jury. We know there was an effort to subpoena David's family members too to testify. None of that happened at this preliminary hearing. Gaps. What would they testify?
Gap 6. There is, as of this hearing, no text, call, or recorded statement in which David expresses an intent to harm Celeste, a fear of her, or a stated desire to silence her. The defense's central argument at the preliminary hearing was direct. The evidence presented shows a body being transported and concealed after death, which is itself a separate, serious crime. But concealment alone does not establish who caused the death or the specific mental state the law requires for a first-degree murder conviction.
Here's what I think, and this is, by the way, based on my conversation with DA Nathan Hochman on my News Nation show, too. I think I was reading between the lines with what he said. I imagine the prosecution would argue, jury, are you expected to believe that Celeste invites herself over, kills herself, and David thinks that quickly, that only minutes later he sends an alibi text? He doesn't think to call emergency services or the police and tell them what he just witnessed, what just happened? Jury, are you expected to believe he's minding his own business when Celeste violently attacks him, he kills her in self-defense, and then calmly sends an alibi text afterwards? He thinks that quickly? And then allegedly buys all the supplies to allegedly dismember her body? They're going to argue it doesn't make sense. They're going to argue, no, he had a plan in mind. He wanted to kill her, that he did murder her, that he did try to cover it up. I mean, let me highlight a few things that came out in the preliminary hearing, because the prosecutors claim that at 10:31, so the night that she comes over, the night that they claim he killed her, he sends this alibi text. Uber said, you're here. WYA, where you at, right? Hello, bro, all these texts. And Detective Farrell testified that the texts from David to Celeste continue that night, that there's around a dozen texts from David to Celeste after her Uber arrival, after she arrives at the home. This is the allegation. Again, all about David purportedly confused about her silence. And Farrell testified that there was no additional activity from Celeste's phone after she arrived. Why? The allegation would be because she's dead. And Farrell testified that David's Tesla, the phone, left the Hollywood Hills residence around 11:30 p.m. to make these purported Santa Barbara trips, right? Farrell says the defendant's last text message to Celeste to her phone was April 26, 2025. So this was the day after his album Withered was released. So you have two things, right? You have no more activity from Celeste's phone. David never texts her again. They would argue suspicious. They would say he really has nothing to do with this and he just never contacts her again. Or does he never contact her again because he killed her, because he knows what happened to her? Prosecution will probably say, we don't need to show you exactly what happened in this house. It's obvious. It's a strong circumstantial evidence case. And you and I both know how many times that we've covered cases here on Sidebar where the prosecution wins on a circumstantial evidence.
California recognizes two forms of malice required for that charge, and the defense argued neither was shown in the record so far. Gap 7. And this one is legal rather than forensic. The three special circumstance allegations that make this a case eligible for the harshest sentencing outcomes: lying in wait, murder committed for financial gain, and murder of a potential witness, were each individually challenged by the defense as either unsupported by the evidence shown or, in one instance, argued to be legally vague under existing California precedent. Whether those specific allegations survive in their current form by the time this reaches trial is itself an open question for the court to resolve, separate from the underlying murder charge.
David's orbit could testify to. One of the potential deficits in this case is that I don't recall any testimony yet that David texted or communicated with anyone about an intent to kill Celeste, or that he was afraid of her, or that he wanted to keep her quiet, or that he admitted to anything. Is that going to come out? Maybe. I mean, I just go back to what attorney Bednarski, defense attorney, said to the court at the prelim. After days of testimony, the evidence only shows a young woman's body was transported and concealed. And while this circumstantial evidence supports concealment of a death, it doesn't support a killing or the requisite intent, forethought that would make it first-degree murder. that the law recognizes two forms of malice. And her argument was neither. And then if you don't have either, there's no murder. Express malice was a deliberate intention to take away a life, and she argued there was no evidence showing deliberate intention here from David. She argued there's no statement of intent anywhere to harm her. There was no history of violence or hostility from him to her. How the relationship, the evidence listed here, is the opposite of homicidal malice. She also argued there was no implied malice. There was no considerable provocation. And she says, counter that, if you look at provocation, it was from Celeste to David, that she was the threatening one. She argued that the three special circumstances allegations that would make this first-degree murder charge eligible for the death penalty are unconstitutionally vague. How lying in wait, you look at the text messages that were presented, would arguably show Celeste called for the meeting during which prosecutors claimed she was killed. There was no surprise attack because she knew and expected David to be home, that he was online playing games when she came over there, or allegedly came over there. The other special circumstance allegation, murder for financial gain, she made the argument that David's prospective music career is not a concrete financial interest under California law, that there's no California precedent for anticipated future earnings. I think this one might have been a difficult argument, though, for the defense, considering you learned how much money he was making and he had his album. What about the third special circumstance, murder of a witness? Well, she argued there was nothing that showed a subjective belief that Celeste had any interest in being a witness or participant in any criminal investigation. Did she make it clear that she was going to work with prosecutors or work with police or go to the police? And she argued that all of Celeste's threats were to ruin him socially and professionally. Again, that she never said she was going to go to the police. Now, the prosecution countered that. The judge ultimately ruled there was enough to go forward.
None of this means the prosecution's case falls apart, and it's worth repeating that clearly. Prosecutors have stated publicly that what was shown at the preliminary hearing was only a fraction of what they've accumulated. And California law does not require the state to reveal its complete case this early in the process. The legal bar at a preliminary hearing is intentionally low, designed only to establish sufficient cause, not to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. What we've laid out here isn't a claim of innocence. It's a documented account of the specific points in the existing public record where the state's case, as presented so far, has acknowledged gaps, which also happen to be the places a defense will almost certainly spend the most time in front of a jury. David Burke has pleaded not guilty, and under the law he is presumed innocent unless and until a jury finds otherwise. His arraignment is scheduled for August 31st, when the formal charges will be entered and the next phase of this case begins.
For trial for now, but I'm highlighting what could be issues at a trial. Look, the next thing that we have to look out for is David's arraignment on August 31st. That's going to be the formal reading of the charges. We'll get a sense of the next steps in this case. Although, let me just call out one more thing. I asked Nathan Hochman on my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, about a plea deal here. Now, I didn't mention, would you consider a deal because of gaps in the case? No, because he feels very confident in the evidence. He knows more about it than I do. He feels very confident that they can find David guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. No, I asked him, if you think about what was just presented at this prelim, the graphic photos of Celeste's dismembered body, the allegedly sexually explicit photos of Celeste, do you want to spare a jury from all that? Do you want to spare the family from all that? He hasn't mentioned the death penalty yet, right? Whether or not they're going to go forward. Are they pursuing it? Is it a bargaining chip? In other words, DA, would you possibly consider a plea deal, or do you want to take this to trial? And DA Hochman told me that David is free to make an offer. We'll see what happens. That's all we have for you right now here.
If you want to verify any of this yourself rather than take our word for it, the preliminary hearing transcript and the district attorney's charging filings are part of the public record in Los Angeles County Superior Court, searchable by David Anthony Burke's case number or by Celeste Rivas Hernandez's name through the court's public case access system. The cross-examination of the deputy medical examiner is worth reading in full. Then tell us in the comments, of these 7 gaps, which one do you think the prosecution most needs to close before this reaches trial? If this kind of evidence-first breakdown is what you come here for, hit like, share it with someone following this case, subscribe to the Crime Infinity, and turn on notifications, because we'll be back with arraignment coverage the moment it happens.